Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Meadville and our continuing live streaming Zoom services. I'm glad you're all here.
Opening words this morning are a song, and so I invite you to sing along at home as for all of our music this morning. Even if you're muted, I invite you to sing out and join in. Even if we can't hear each other, we can at least be breathing together. It goes like this. Call down a blessing, call down a blessing. Call down a blessing, call down. Call down a blessing, call down a blessing. Call down a blessing, call down. Let's do that together, here we go. Call down a blessing, call down a blessing. Call down a blessing, call down. Call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down. Beauty above us, beauty before us, beauty within us and beauty between us. So call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down. Call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down. Love above us, love before us, love within us and love between us. So call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down. Call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down.
So thank you, Matt, for bringing us into this virtual space and hopefully into ourselves with that beautiful song. Again, welcome everyone for our live streaming service. I haven't been here for a couple services and it was wonderful to see the attendance is growing. I'm hoping we are all learning to find our sense of community and connection even in this virtual space. So before we go any further, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker and musician this morning. This is Matt Meyer we've been listening to. He's a lifetime Unitarian Universalist, and he has a long background as a musician and a worship leader for UU congregations. He lives in Boston, but he travels, as he says, as an itinerant worship leader. And he brings the news of Unitarian Universalism to congregations all over the country. He is the director of operations for Sanctuary Boston, a contemporary UU worship community with music and engaging worship. And he is also a founding organizer of the UU Song Leaders Convergence, a gathering for all UUs who love community singing to share skills, best practices, and songs in order to build a more musical movement together. So may we join your musical movement and be moved by your music this morning, Matt. So let's continue, and we are going to do our unison affirmation of covenant and mission. And if you choose to recite that with us at home, please feel free to do so. Our covenant is to be a loving, joyful community which nurtures spiritual growth, promotes compassion and responsibility and service. I think there's some missing words here on mine. In a trust of mutual respect. Our mission is to be a faith community devoted to love and respect, reason and justice.
And I invite you to join me in the chalice lighting. If you have a chalice or candle at home, feel free to light it or just take a few deep breaths to be fully present with us together. Our words this morning come from Psalm 98. Oh, sing a new song to the Eternal. Shout praise, all earth break into music and song. Praise the Eternal with lyre and song. Let the sea and all within it thunder praise. Let the world and its inhabitants, let the rivers clap their hands, let mountains sing in chorus. Oh, sing a new song to the Eternal.
Thank you, Matt. So this is our time for joys and sorrows. And you can enter the chat room and put in a quick joy or sorrow, which I will summarize for you. So I'm going to look now and see what we have. From Alex, thoughts and prayers for all who are afflicted by the COVID virus, including the leadership of this country. And from Amy, I'd like to share a joy for the beauty of the fall foliage. And amen to that, Amy. This is the first year I can remember seeing this degree of color in our fall foliage, and it's absolutely wonderful to see. So if there are no other joys and sorrows, let's always light a candle actually or in your heart and mind for all those joys and sorrows that are too tender for us to share with one another aloud, but which we hold within us. May we hold each other in our joys and sorrows.
And I invite you to take another deep breath to be present in this moment. A moment, at least, when there is nothing else to be done, nowhere else to be. To breathe deeply and be present in your body. Our whole and holy, our fragile yet beautiful bodies. I invite you to join me in a spirit of prayer. Spirit of love that is within us and between us, be with us as we are with each other this morning. We gather bringing our whole complicated selves, We gather for a moment of stillness in a time of great movement. We gather for a few minutes of peace together in a time of chaos. There's chaos in the wildfires, in our climate, in our politics. There is also perhaps some chaos in our hearts as anxiety moves around us and within us. Spirit of love, be with us as we're with each other, finding some moments of stillness, finding a place to stand where we might move the world, to bend the arc towards justice. Be with us as we're with each other in all the joys and the sorrows, all the chaos and the moments of peace. May it be so. Amen.
Yes, be.
And I'd like to share a story with you all called Miriam and the Tambourine. This is a story about Miriam, who was just about to enter the 4th grade. And Miriam was thrilled because that was the year at her school that every student got to learn to play an instrument and play in the school orchestra. And Miriam loved music, so she was thrilled about getting to learn how to make music with other people and to play an instrument. Did any of you ever play in the school band or orchestra? And can you wave your hands like this? If you did, we've got a couple people. So you understand the thrill and the terror even of going into the orchestra room for the first time. On the first day of school, Miriam got to the room extra early and she wandered around looking at all of the instruments, wondering which one she would get to play. There was the huge bass drum, beautiful violins, shiny brass trumpets. She saw her teacher, Miss Berman, there, and she said, "Here I am. What instrument do you need me to play in the orchestra?" Miss Berman looked at her and said, "Miriam, right? You know, I think I've got just the instrument for you." She disappeared into her office and came out a moment later with a tambourine. "A tambourine?" Miriam said. Well, is that even an instrument?" "Well, of course," said Miss Berman. "Every great orchestra needs a great tambourine player, and you are our tambourine player." Well, Miriam took the tambourine, but for the whole rehearsal all day long, she ended up having to play the same rhythm over and over and over. It went like this. Da 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 da. Can you all try that? Da 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 da. And the next day when she came back to school, for the whole rehearsal all day long, it was that same rhythm again over and over. It went da 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 da. And Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, the whole rest of the week, it was that same rhythm over and over and over. It went da 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 da. So you might be able to guess that Miriam wasn't any more excited about the tambourine at the end of the week than she had been at the beginning. So when she went to church with her family that Sunday, in these pre-COVID times, of course, she was feeling pretty sad about it. She sat down in her Sunday school class and her teacher Mahesh noticed that she was looking sad and he asked her about it. She said, well, I was so excited to learn to play an instrument and to play in the orchestra this week, but I ended up playing the same rhythm over and over, and I'm stuck playing the tambourine, and I don't even know if it's really an instrument." "Well, the tambourine," Mahesh said. He said, "Did you know that where my family comes from in southern India, we call the tambourine a kanjira?" Can you say kanjira? He said people spend their whole lives learning to master the kanjira because it's an enormously complex instrument. And it's a beautiful instrument. Every sound that you can play on the kanjira, you can also sing out. And so people teach each other the rhythms of the kanjira by singing out the syllables of it. People put the syllables and the rhythms together and they create poetry out of the music of the kanjira. In fact, they create whole books of this poetry. Where I come from, the tambourine is an instrument for creating this kind of poetry, and, well, Well, beauty in the world. Poetry and beauty, Miriam said. That doesn't sound so bad. After church was over, Miriam was sitting by herself at coffee hour, and a family friend came and sat with her. Anna had remembered. She said, "This was the week you were going to start the fourth grade and learn to play an instrument and play in the school orchestra. How's it going?" "Well," she said, "I ended up with a tambourine and I just play the same rhythm all week long. It goes da 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 da." "The tambourine," Anna said. She said, "Did you know that where my family comes from in Brazil, we call the tambourine a pandeiro? Can you say pandeiro?" She said, "People have been playing the pandeiro for generations in Brazil. And in fact, when my ancestors were brought to Brazil as enslaved people, they would then play the pandeiro to create music and invite their community to come together and sing and dance even when times were so difficult. And in fact, they would even learn to use the music of the pandeiro to secretly practice martial arts to protect themselves against the people that held them as slaves. Where I come from, the tambourine is an instrument for community and safety, even." "Safety and community," Miriam said. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. So Miriam was thinking about all of this when she went back to school the next day. She saw her teacher, Miss Berman, there, and she told her about the kanjira and the pandeiro, about poetry and beauty and safety and community. But she said, "I don't know what any of that has to do with me. I'm still playing the same rhythm all week long that goes da 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 da." "Well," Miss Berman said, "Miriam, do you know where your name comes from?" "Well, of course," she said. "Comes from my parents." "Well, right, but do you know who Miriam was?" she asked. She said, "In your family's history, there's a story of the ancient Israelites fleeing slavery in Egypt and traveling to a promised land of freedom. And while they were on their way to freedom, they had a wonderful celebration to celebrate the journey they were making. And it was a woman named Miriam with a tambourine that got that celebration started. Miriam was one of the first musicians in all recorded history. And women just like her would play the tambourine for weddings and festivals and celebrations in ancient Israel and throughout the Middle East. Where in your family's history, the tambourine was a way of, well, it was a way of celebrating that journey towards freedom and the journey towards love. Love and freedom, Miriam said. Well, that sounds pretty good. Now, eventually, Miriam went on to try out some of the other instruments in the orchestra. She played a little bit of the bass drum and took some violin lessons and played trumpet for a while, but she always remembered this story of the tambourine. How all around the world and all throughout history, people had taken the simplest of instruments, the most basic of tools they had in their hands, and they found ways to use them to shape the world around them, to create poetry and beauty, to foster safety and community, to celebrate the journey we're all trying to make towards love and freedom. And I think that's a little bit of what we do when we gather in our congregations on Sunday mornings, however it is that we gather. We come together not just to remind each other of the values that are most important to us, but to think together about how we can practice new skills, how we can practice using whatever instruments, whatever tools we might have in our hands to make this world a better place, to make it the kind of world we want to live in together. So thank you for helping me with the story. May it be so.
We have a reading this morning, Invitation to Brave Space by Mickey Scott Bay Jones, that Matt has brought to us as well. Together, we will create brave space because there is no such thing as safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard everywhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. we have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side.
Thank you, Karen. Our first hymn this morning is called Blessed Motion by Annie Zylstra. It was written when she was inspired by the words of Martin Prechtel, who spoke of what it was like to survive an earthquake in Guatemala. He spoke of what it was like to see the ground beneath his feet, that which had always been so solid, so permanent, suddenly rise up in motion. And he said that the myth of believing in solid ground is a myth of those who live on the earth rather than as a part of it. I know in the last few months, for me, it's felt like the earth beneath my feet is constantly in motion, even every day as I try to find some sense of grounding. And so I invite you into the spirit of motion in this song. There's a low part and a high part that's call and response, and I again invite you to sing along at home. This is a great time to try out some new harmonies that you might not have tried if other folks could hear you. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change, and the ever-rolling ocean. All moves on in perfect motion. All is change and ever rolling ocean. All moves on. We'll do that low part 2 more times. Motion, all is change and ever rolling ocean. All moves on in perfect motion. All is change and ever rolling ocean. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change, and the ever-rolling ocean. I believe in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, the wind of steady change, and the ever-rolling ocean. I believe in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, and the wind of steady change, and the ever-rolling ocean. I believe in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, and the wind of steady change, and the ever-rolling ocean. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change and the ever-rolling ocean. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion. Well, I don't know about you, but I wake up most days with a to-do list for the day. Between you and me, don't tell anyone, it's usually an overly ambitious to-do list, and to be honest, I rarely check everything off of it. It's usually scribbled on a post-it on the corner of my desk. Now, on that list, most days, is writing. Writing is something that's important to me. It's something I, I value, something I want to make time for, but that I often actually struggle to sit down and do. It's hard to just put your butt in the chair and start writing, I find, even though it's so important to me, even though it's on my list almost every day. One of my favorite authors, Anne Lamott, talks about this, how hard it is, in fact, to just sit down and write. She says, the discouraging voices will hound you. This is all piffle, they will say. And, well, those voices may be right. What you are doing may just be practice. But that's okay, because practice is how you're going to get better. Some of the best writing advice I ever got was from a teacher who told me, for now, don't write. Just take a few minutes and write what you would write if you were going to write. I sometimes feel like I haven't actually written anything in all the years since I got that advice, but luckily I have written about a lot about what I would write if I did write. You might call this the practice of practicing, learning how to practice, which is close to my heart as a musician. The demons of perfectionism stand in the way of writing, just as they stand in the way of creative risk-taking in general. Which is unfortunate, because we know that if you're trying to create a life for yourself that doesn't yet exist, it's going to require some creative risk-taking. And certainly in uncertain and anxious times like these, just trying to be your best self every day requires setting aside some of those discouraging voices that hound you. And particularly these days, imagining a compassionate world of justice and equity, a world so far from the one we read about in the headlines and see all around us. Well, imagining that better world and working for it, speaking it into existence, living it into existence, it means setting aside those voices that show up and say that your efforts are just piffle. When the demons of perfectionism show up for me like this, I try to practice the practicing of showing up for myself and for others. I learned a little bit about practicing in music school. I attended Berklee College of Music years ago, and one of the requirements there was 4 semesters of ear training, which is learning to sight sing music just by reading the notes on a page, and learning to write down music just by listening to a song. Now, when I began school, I knew that there were people who were capable of this kind of incredible magic, but I couldn't actually imagine learning it myself. It all seemed like some kind of Harry Potter nonsense to me. Like, you may as well ask me to sit in class and make a feather float above my desk using a conductor's baton. I remember on the first day of ear training class in particular, there was a sort of nervous silence among us students. Silence, that is, except for one student who was quite loud in his nervousness. This one student interrupted the teacher in the first few minutes of the first class to share that he was worried the class was too advanced for him. He wanted to make it clear that he knew, in fact, not a single thing about ear training. Now, the teacher kindly paused his introductions to respond, saying, we'd all been taken entrance exams and been placed in the appropriate classes. There was nothing to worry about, he was sure. The teacher tried to continue, but was interrupted again. Well, the man said, is this the very lowest class? Because I need to be in the very lowest class. Now, you could tell our poor teacher looked around the room a little sheepishly, not really wanting to answer that yes, we were in fact a class of the very most basic students in the entire college. Well, he said, it is ear training 101, so it is the lowest. There is, I guess, he said, a class for people that have previously failed the 101, but you all are just about the lowest. Now, some of the other students giggled a little bit at this man's anxieties. I was kind of glad to hear, though, that someone was questioning the absurd notion that sight singing could be taught. I don't know what happened next for that student, but he never came back to a second class. Not because anything we did on that first day was too difficult for him, I'm sure of it. But I think he just lacked a belief that improvement was even possible. I kept going, thinking that if other students had done this before, generations of them, it must be possible somehow, even if I didn't understand it, and I made a commitment to at least practice the material. I've always remembered this student, though, who gave up before he started. It's not just that he didn't try to become a master at ear training, it's that he didn't even try the practicing of it, which always struck me as the real loss. When the discouraging voices hound me in my life, I sometimes think of this student, and I remind myself that maybe for now the work I'm doing is just practice. But practice is how I'm going to get better. These last months, as well as the coming weeks leading up to the election, are a time of uprisings calling for change, a time of turmoil, a time of calling on those in power, which in some ways is all of us, to play a new role in our communities. It's time to learn some new tunes. Particularly for white people, this is a time to practice some new skills and learn to play some new roles. A time for listening in deeper ways we haven't always done so well before. A time for having hard conversations that we haven't yet practiced enough. Fellow white folks, when you see people of color making demands, now is a time to practice amplifying those demands by repeating them in calls to your representatives, to your colleagues, and to your family. If you inherited wealth that was accumulated in a time of systematic segregation, which is true of all wealth in this country, it's time to practice giving it away. If your muscle memory has been to call the police when things go wrong, now is a good time to practice something different, learning new skills for community safety and accountability. I know I won't all of a sudden do all of these things, but I want to practice the doing of them. Musicians know as well as anyone that muscle memory is very real, that consistent practicing changes the very structure of our brains, rewiring our circuitry, forging new connections and new possibilities. No one is born a musician. Musicians are just the ones that learned how to practice. Even songbirds need elder birds to sing to them and teach them the tunes. Practice doesn't make music perfect, but it makes music possible. And so, beloveds, let us practice the practicing, showing up for ourselves and others to build a new world of justice and equity and compassion. Practice won't make the world perfect, but it makes a better world possible. Someday, I want to be an expert in justice and compassion when anxiety moves in the air like a storm and uncertainty surrounds us. Someday I want to be well practiced at creating that brave space that our reading talked about, even when there is no such thing as safe space. Someday I want to be masterful at amplifying the voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. Someday I want to be part of transforming our so-called justice system that has hurt so many so deeply and forging a new system of accountability and love. These are daunting tasks, to be sure, and on most days, learning to transcribe a symphony by ear seems more manageable. But that's okay, because for now, I don't have to do all of those things. I just need to practice doing what I would do if I were doing them. So, dear ones, I invite you to not promise to be your best self today. Don't try and do it today. Just try and be the person you would be if you were practicing being your best self. Don't try to rebuild a new world in the image of love this week. Just practice doing what you would do if you had committed to such things. You have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow, and so let us start together, and let us grow together, and let us practice together. May it be so. I'd like to invite you all into a time of community sharing. In just a moment, we're going to send you to some breakout groups to talk in smaller groups about this message. And the questions I want to invite you to reflect on are, number one, what are you practicing these days in order to better live your values? And what new roles are you learning to play in your community? I invite you to join me in extinguishing the chalice. You have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. And so let us start together, let us grow together, and let us practice together side by side. Go in peace, go in love, and go and be blessed as you are a blessing to others.
This morning, as we end our service, could we all just take 1 minute, literally 1 minute, and reflect on all that Matt has offered us this morning and our roles and our practices in our lives and in our community. So just take a few seconds and sit with all that has come to you from outside and what has come up within you this morning. So once again, thank you everyone for coming and for being here as we reform our community and affirm our connections in new ways. And hopefully you will stay with us and come to coffee hour for a little while where we get to visit with one another. And Matt, thank you for everything you brought to us this morning.